All right, so in this video, we're going to look at we're still looking at the social effects of the Industrial Revolution. And what we're going to look at in this one is changes to family life and gender roles. So, when the Industrial Revolution first starts, in the beginning, uh, family ties were still really important. So a family might move to a city together, and at the beginning, they might still work as a family unit. And typically, what you might see is a family work together uh, in a mine. Like the family might all have jobs at the same coal mine or iron mine, and they might all do different jobs. So it might be the dad actually goes into the mine and works, so the dad mines. Mom might haul the stuff out, hauls coal out, and the kids, depending on how old they are, the kids might sort stuff, help maintain equipment, or other kinds of odd jobs around the mine. So it's possible that at first, when the farming family leaves the rural area and moves into the city, they may still work together all in the same place. Uh, you might also see families do what's called piecework, or sometimes this is called sweat work, where we get the term sweatshops, at home. So they may be doing some kind of like menial labor at home and paid by the piece, which is why it's also sometimes called piecework. So something that you might have a family work together doing is like uh, putting together matchbooks, like stuff that we can't quite use a factory for, that you still need humans to do. And you can kind of create like a rudimentary assembly line at home once you get good at it. So you might find families still working together at the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. Piecework is going to be something that pretty much all poor families do to make ends meet. So this is not something that's going to go away. This is actually going to continue throughout the 19th century into the beginning of the 20th century. And it's actually something that's kind of coming back now. If you think about like modern gig work, like driving for Uber or something like DoorDash, that's kind of what this is in the modern setting. Over time, though, it became less and less likely for families to all have the same employers. And so it was more likely that each member of the family went to their own job, kids too, and maybe rarely saw each other. They might see each other maybe at nighttime, maybe. But factories were open 24 hours a day, so it's likely that one of the members of the family might work the night shift. So it's unlikely that you might ever see that person. Your paths may rarely cross. So you might all share the same living space, but never actually see them. Or not never, rarely. So it's kind of like living with a ghost almost. Like I said, children were important wage earners. Children didn't earn as much, but whatever they made usually filled in the gaps. It's what made the ends meet. Was what the work children did for their families. But over time, this changed. So, especially in Great Britain, where we're spending most of our time when we think about the Industrial Revolution, in the United Kingdom, child labor was seen as increasingly problematic. Because it's kind of weird to have little kids hanging around with adults who aren't their parents. Because that's what this was. Kids would go to work with people who worked at the factory. So they're hanging around with a bunch of adults who are not their parents and don't have their best interests at heart. Like, a child's boss is not going to make sure that that child is safe or taken care of. That child's boss is there to make money. So they're going to use the child just like they would any of their other employees. And that's definitely a moral gray area. So the British Parliament passes a law the Factory Act of 1833. And the Factory Act of 1833 limits child labor. So if a child was less than 9 years old, they could not work. If they were between 9 and 13 years old, they could work 8 hours a day. And if they were between 13 and 18, they could work a full 12-hour day. So then you have this issue of, well, if kids less than 9 can't work and their parents absolutely have to work, then what are these kids doing? And so eventually, what ends up happening is that in the 1880s, a full 50 years after the Factory Act was passed, by the way, education became mandatory for children under 10. So it's good that we're not allowing little kids to go work in a factory, but then we have the unintended consequence of now we have a bunch of unsupervised 9-year-olds, and what are we going to do with them? It's not good that they're just running around without any supervision. At least when they were in the factory, somebody was like, there were rules. There was somebody there. Now there's nobody there. That's not any better. So that becomes one of the reasons why we get compulsory education, was because there's nobody to watch the kids. Now, as the 19th century moves forward, factory work becomes more lucrative. Like, you could actually live on the salary of a factory worker. You could work on what a factory worker would make. So, well, and we also have labor unions to thank for that. And because these jobs are providing more money, we definitely see an increase in general quality of life. But as this happens, we start to see another social shift. Men are seen as the breadwinners, They're seen as the ones who go to work. And women who before this had to go to work because the family wouldn't survive, women are now expected to stay home and take care of the home and the children. So visually speaking, like if you were to just look at a family in time period 1 and a family in time period 3, visually this looks very different. Because regular families, everyone had to work. Everyone had to work before this. Now, these families look like the rich families from time period 1. Like the women aren't expected to work. The women are supposed to, take care of the domestic stuff. So as families get richer, they start to resemble the rich families from time period 1. This leads to a couple of changes for the roles within the family. So the men's role doesn't really change. They are the workers. They worked before, they work now. Women now take up this role as homemaker. And this is sometimes called the cult of domesticity. And what the cult of domesticity is this idea that women need to make homemaking look effortless. Even though, as anybody who has ever cleaned a house knows, that is not easy work. So they have to make homemaking look effortless. They have to cook and clean and do all that stuff that is actually hard work, but they need to make it look like they're not even trying. And so the ones who can afford it, some actually hire maids on the down low to make it look like they aren't working. And so we'll also see the invention of all sorts of homemaking inventions to make this stuff easier. But there was also this kind of need to buy that stuff. there's definitely a component of like keeping up with your neighbors. And this is passed down to daughters. Now, sons are in a weird position because sons are being raised by their mothers because their fathers are off at work. And the British thought that this was not good for boys. So the British thought this was not great. So this is where we get the Boy Scouts from. So we get little boys who their fathers are at work all day. And so they need a strong masculine presence in their life. And that's where the Boy Scouts were invented. So we get this masculine presence in their life. Until they would go to school, in which case they might, they're not spending as much time being surrounded by women. Now, there's one more group of people that we need to mention here. So we've got husbands and wives and children. There's one more group of people that we need to pay a little bit of attention to, and that's unmarried women. Unmarried women still worked. You could find them in most factory jobs. Any place where people were working, you would typically find unmarried women. Now, this has a couple of not so great side effects. For one, you're going to see an increase in unplanned pregnancies. And this is a holdover from time period 2. This is a continuation as, again, these women don't have their families or village society to protect them. Maybe worst of all is that you would see unmarried women working in coal mines. And here's where you see the patriarchy of the system in full effect. So the coal mines were an especially bad place for women to be employed because in the mines, sexual assault was pretty common. And that's awful. But the response to it is equally patriarchal. the response to these awful instances, and there are transcripts of female minors going to Parliament and giving accounts of what happened in the effort to try to fix this system. So, in the response to these awful instances of sexual assault, instead of actually trying to do something about the crimes themselves, the British Parliament simply banned women from going underground in the coal mines. And this was the Mines Act of 1842. Now, to be fair, they are trying to do something, but instead of fixing the problem, they're just telling women they can't do this job, which is not the right response. So instead of making things safer for women, they appealed to the idea of morality and said this is not a job for women, so women can't do this. So we're going to stop there. So in this video, we looked at the changes to family life and gender roles and how they've pretty much radically shifted from the beginning of our course. In our next video, we'll look at social classes and how the Industrial Revolution radically shifts the social classes and the social hierarchy of Europe in the 19th century. So until then, this is Mr. Nissen signing off.